Come and buy what I am selling. My firewood is the best because it is cut with sweat and joy. It will light up your fireplace and keep you warm. It will put a smile on the face of your wife at home because it will cook her food just fine. Buy my firewood and attest to what I am telling you. The female voice behind the words sang happily and joyously. In the history of the entire village, never had it been heard that a woman was a woodcutter or even selling firewood in the bush. So, what exactly could have driven her into something specifically reserved for not just men, but for the strong men in the village? Adim's father died even before she saw the light of the world. He had gone to hunt as usual, but he never came back. Some said he was eaten up by wild animals. Some said he went too far into the forest and lost his way, while others concluded that he must have fallen into his own trap and died there. His death wasn't something normal because no one knew exactly what happened to him, and that placed a stigma on not just her mother, but on Adim as well. They called Adim's mother a witch and said that she ate up her husband. As a result, they distanced themselves from her completely. When Adim was born, no one wanted anything to do with her as well. The daughter of a witch was also a witch, right? Being raised by a widowed mother whom no one wanted to come close to was very hard on Adim. While other children gathered at the village square and played at sundown, Adim stayed in her mother's hut and watched her mother cook instead. They didn't want Adim to come anywhere close to them, so she had only her mother. When Adim was old enough to start fetching water in the small river, she went alone. If she met her mates there, they would stay away until she was done fetching and left, or sometimes they would ask her to wait until they were done before she would be allowed to come anywhere close to the river. "We don't want you to infect us with your mother's witchcraft though," they would often say, loud enough for Adim to hear. At first, Adim would cry all the way to her mother, and her mother would console her and tell her not to pay attention to them. She also suffered the same stigma and distancing, and even worse, and although she didn't like it because she was innocent, she had learned to live with it. Adim's mother urged her to learn to live with it as well. That way, their scathing words will not get to you any longer. If they see that you cry each time they taunt you with it, they will continue doing it, she told Adim. Adim had no choice but to develop a thick skin towards them. But did he stop? As she grew older, she started running errands for her mother, like going to the market to buy a few things. But Adim noticed that even the market women had taunting words for her as well. "Tell us how your mother managed to eat her husband, Adim. Did you also get a taste of him in her stomach as well? What did he taste like? Why did she kill him?" Those were questions everyone in the market asked Adim. She really tried not to let the words get to her, but the more she tried, the more they asked questions just to rile her up. Adim's mother always had one word of advice, which was, ignore them. But sometimes, there was only so much that a person could take. One day, Adim was returning from the stream where she went to get water, and she ran into a group of girls who were also her age mates. They began to tease Adim, calling her mother a witch. Adim tried to ignore them, but they didn't relent. As she continued on her way, they turned around and began to follow her, raising their voices, saying vile words, and laughing at Adim. "Stay away from me," Adim warned them, but it only fueled them the more. Then, they made Adim more upset when they pushed the pot of water on her head, causing all the water she had fetched to spill to the ground. Unable to control her anger, Adim turned around and beat them up. Even though she was one against a group of girls, Adim was able to beat them up. But that singular act of hers put her and her mother in more trouble. The parents of the girls reported to the king, saying that Adim attacked their daughters without provocation. It was a blatant lie, but because the king also took sides with the villagers and called Adim's mother a witch, he believed them. Adim and her mother were summoned to the palace, but when they arrived, the king asked them to stay at a distance so that they wouldn't pollute his throne. Adim tried to explain to the king what led to a fight, but he refused to let her speak. He didn't send for them because he wanted to hear Adim's side of the story. He sent for them to warn them never to lay hands on any of the villagers, or you will be thrown into the deep forest and be eaten alive by wild animals. The king threatened them angrily. Adim's mother pleaded with the king to let them go to another village to start a new life, but the king vehemently refused. Instead, he commanded them to remain in the village, even though no one liked them. In all that happened that day, the only thing that stuck to Adim's mind was how beautiful the palace was. She kept wishing that one day she would get to live in the palace. Like and subscribe for more interesting and educative stories like this. It was a pipe dream because Adim knew that someone like her would never be allowed anywhere near the palace. And so, a while later, the wish died, or it was replaced by something more important, which was how to fend for herself and her mother. Because of the situation Adim and her mother found themselves in, it was difficult to do what others were doing to earn a living, and soon enough, Adim and her mother began to starve. For years, they relied on what the father had gathered and stored. Yes, he was a great hunter who had lots of money stored in a pit in their bedroom, and that was what Adim and her mother had been using to survive. However, money that wasn't added to would definitely get finished, and that was what happened. Adim realized that she needed to do something for them to survive. She was 19 already and no longer a child, so she shouldn't expect her mother to do everything for her. Adim did not realize how difficult it was to earn a living until she started trying out what the women were doing. Not that Adim was looking for friends. She simply wanted to do something that would put food in her stomach and that of her mother's. Adim even stopped thinking of friends right from when she was little because of the names they kept calling her. She believed that she was ugly because they called her ugly as well. Adim tried to sell something at the village market, but no one would buy it from her, no matter how good or cheap what she sold was. It was different when she was simply coming to buy something. They might taunt her and call her names, but they would still sell to her, taking her money. However, giving her their money was a completely different ball game. Everyone stayed away from Adim in the market, as though she was a plague. Adim went back home in tears, but her mother, who was always soft-spoken and good-natured, kept encouraging Adim not to give up. Adim could not understand how her mother could have suffered all that and still be kind and encouraged. The villagers refused to let Adim run errands for them. What about to watch over their babies while they went about their activities for the day? They refused, or even to clear their farms. Clearing farms was something that the male children in the village did, but being that Adim was limited to a lot of things, she stopped thinking about her gender. It wouldn't put food on their table, would it? After trying everything and nothing was working, Adim began to think outside the box. She just couldn't fold her arms and watch until she and her mother died of starvation simply because no one would employ her or buy from her. It was worse because they were stuck in the village. Eventually, Adim came up with a good idea. She would go into the bush, cut some firewood, and sell to hunters who liked to roast their meat in the bush, farmers who liked to burn the bushes in their farms or even roast their yams, and of course, strangers passing by. It seemed like something that would work because these men in the bushes hardly had the time to behave like the women or even the king. They weren't concerned with who was selling the firewood. The most important thing was being able to get firewood. Even though it was a man's job, there weren't many men who did it in the village because of how difficult it was. They did hunting, butchering, palm wine tapping, and even hut building and mending. But they rarely ventured into cutting firewood in the bush and selling them off. Only a few of them did it. So Adim thought that it would be lucrative for her. For the very first time, her mother was worried about her. She had never discouraged Adim from doing anything she set her mind to do. But then again, a young girl being in the bush all by herself was dangerous. What if something hurt her? What if she got attacked by wild animals? Not to forget that the same bush had taken Adim's father from them and put them in this condition. Her mother's concerns were valid, but Adim told her mother that they didn't have a choice now. It was either that or death by starvation, and Adim would rather try than allow fear to prevent her. After much deliberation, Adim's mother had no choice but to let her do it. Adim took an axe and went into the bush. The first few days were difficult for Adim because cutting firewood wasn't a child's play. She always went home with blisters, and her mother would massage her palms with hot rag to make her feel better. And then the next morning, she would set out again. Adim wanted to do things differently. She always went for the dry firewood, the ones that would light up the moment it was set ablaze. She wanted anyone that bought from her to always return for more. Also, Adim added marketing to what she was selling. After cutting enough firewood, Adim would take some of them to the roadside, where strangers mostly traveled by foot, and she would begin to market her goods. With a loud but melodious voice, Adim would recite the words. It drew people's attention to her, especially being that she was a female. When they heard her voice and what she was marketing, they would come closer, wanting to see what female had the courage to do something that no woman had ever done. That all alone made them patronize Adim. Most of them were strangers, and they knew nothing about what the villagers called Adim and her mother. Just as Adim guessed, even the farmers and hunters in the bush didn't care. They only cared when they returned to the village and to their families. Like and subscribe for more stories like this. As for Adim, she didn't care whether the men patronized her in the bush, where no one could see them or know. And then when they got to the village, they pretended as though they didn't know Adim or had never bought her firewood. What mattered to Adim was being able to sell the firewood, bringing home some money for her mother, and having food in their stomach. After a while, she stopped having blisters and pain because she got used to it. Also, Adim sold at a very good price, making a lot of men want to buy from her. To Adim, she was at peace. In the bush, she got to mind her business. There, at least, no one was taunting her and calling her a witch. There, no one was distancing themselves from her. Soon enough, the bush became a peaceful place for Adim, aside from her mother's hut, that is. Adim was only careful not to go farther into the bush. It wasn't because she was afraid though, being that she was now conversant with every corner of the bush. She was no longer scared, but she simply wanted to listen to the words of her mother. Every single morning, before setting out, Adim's mother would remind her to stay away from the deep bushes. Don't forget what happened to your dear father. You're the only one I have. If anything happens to you, my life will be over. She would always remind Adim. Adim kept reassuring her mother that she would never put herself in harm's way. Aside from promising her mother that she would take care of her, Adim also promised her that she wouldn't do anything that would make her lose her life. She didn't want to die and leave her mother because she knew that her mother would not be able to fully fend for herself. Also, Adim didn't want to be alone in the entire world. Her mother wasn't only her parent, but she was also Adim's best friend. In the evening, when Adim was done with all her chores, she and her mother would sit by the fireside, talking and laughing to the dead of the night. Sometimes, when they didn't have anything to talk about, they would simply sit in silence and listen to the songs of the crickets and croaking of the toads outside their huts. The thought of doing that alone sent shivers down Adim's spine. In the bush, while Adim went about her business, she always had her ears to the ground, listening for sounds that weren't human. She wasn't just good at cutting woods now, but she was also a good tree climber. Adim already told herself that the day she would come across a dangerous animal, she would climb up the nearest tree in the blink of an eye. That way, they would not be able to get her. But so far, Adim had been lucky. She also stayed away from the deep bushes as well. One day, after Adim was done selling to the hunters and farmers that needed firewood, she took the rest of it to the roadside, arranged them carefully, and began to market them as she always did. Come and buy what I am selling. My firewood is the best because it is cut with sweat and joy. It will light up your fireplace and keep you warm. It will put a smile on the face of your wife at home because it will cook her food just fine. Buy my firewood and attest to what I am telling you. It had become her signature anthem. Those who had bought from her before knew her exact words. Some of them had even already memorized it, and they looked forward to hearing those words from Adim because they came with melody as well. Adim always repeated the words for as long as she stood beside her arranged firewood, until every single log or piece was sold. Then, as she saw a group of men approaching, Adim increased the volume of her voice. Usually, seeing that they came in a large group, Adim should have been afraid and run into the bush, but she didn't, and that was because her heart was pure. She had never seen those men pass by the side of the road, since she started selling firewood, but she was simply minding her business. And as such, Adim believed that they wouldn't do her any harm. On the contrary, she was very hopeful. If each man bought a log from her, Adim would sell off everything at once and she would return home to her mother sooner. So yes, she hoped that they would patronize her. Adim used the same words that she had always used, but she said them with more volume and melody, trying as hard as she could to draw their attention. But unfortunately, they passed Adim by without even looking at her direction. It was as though she was talking to deaf men. But even if they were deaf, were they also blind? Certainly, they could see her standing right there with arranged pieces of firewood. As they went their way, Adim's eyes followed them. Hmm, this is strange, she muttered to herself, shrugging. First of all, she had never seen this amount of men traveling all at once, and Adim could only wonder where they were headed. Also, they neither said a word nor turned to look at her. They had simply passed like ghosts. Adim went back to selling her firewood, but she was already eager to get home because she couldn't wait to tell her mother what she had experienced. That night, she did, and her mother said that from her experience, it could only mean one thing, that a prince had passed by Adim without her knowledge. A few days later, it was announced all through the village that the young prince, the son of the king, who had been away for a long time, was back from his long trip. Like and subscribe for more interesting stories like this. So, it turned out that Adim's mother wasn't wrong. The announcement put the villagers on their 10 toes. But Adim had a different feeling. Adim could not believe that a prince passed by and she had no idea. A prince! Adim's mother explained to her that as the custom of the village, whenever any member of the royal family was traveling, especially the prince or princess, a large group of men blindfolded him or her before following around so that no one would catch sight of them. Also, that the prince or princess would not get distracted by the sight of anything or anyone. Also, they were not expected to talk to anyone all through the journey. Adim understood now why they hadn't even acknowledged her presence, not that they were deaf. She wanted to feel bad for not knowing that it was the prince and going ahead to advertise her firewood. But her mother told her that she hadn't done anything wrong, so there was nothing to be worried about. The prince's arrival wasn't the only announcement that was made. The prince was also back to take his rightful place as the heir of the throne and also find a wife. He would have to find a wife first. Every young girl in the village began to make preparations for the big day. It was mostly done in a way that they would be assembled in the palace, dance and parade themselves for the prince to make a choice. Whoever he selected, regardless of who she was, would become the prince's wife, which would automatically become the next queen of the village. Young girls spent day and night learning new dance steps. Their mothers were also there to teach some of them, even using the dance step the old queen had used to secure the king. Perhaps, if the prince was like his father, he would also be enthralled by the dance. The only person that wasn't spending day and night locked up in a hut and learning dance steps was Adim. First of all, she didn't know how to dance. Maybe if they had allowed her to play with the others in the village square when they were kids, Adim would have learned 1 or 2 steps because she knew that dancing was also part of the things they did there. But that wasn't the case. Second of all, Adim knew that she would never be allowed anywhere near the palace. The only time in her entire life when she had gone close to the palace was when she had beaten up those girls and they were summoned. Dreaming that she would magically be picked among the beautiful and curvy girls in the village was useless, and Adim had better things to do with her time. For her, going to the bush and cutting firewood was the only thing that she was good at. Even on the D-Day, Adim took her axe and went into the bush while people trooped to the palace. Families were already anticipating and praying that their daughter would be picked because that meant that the entire family would change for the better. Even Adim's mother didn't move a muscle. She stayed in her hut, patiently waiting for her daughter's return. The prince, handsomely crowned in all his glory, sat on the throne and watched the girls dance and shake their waist, trying to entice him. Some of them paraded themselves like models in really beautiful attires. But as he looked at them, he felt as though someone was missing. Since the prince's arrival, what he didn't mention to anyone, even to his parents, was that the voice of the girl cutting firewood was stuck in his head. During the day, he couldn't stop hearing the voice in his head. At night, he dreamed of the voice. He had no idea what she looked like because he didn't see her, being that he was covered by the large group of men. But he hadn't forgotten what her voice sounded like. All the prince needed was to hear her voice, and he would know who she was. The prince had fallen so deeply in love with her that he couldn't find any other maiden attractive. After all the dance and parade, the prince disappointed the young girls and their families when he said that he wasn't impressed. He went further to say that he had fallen in love with someone else and that the only way to find her was to meet the girl who was a woodcutter. The moment they heard the words of the prince, they all got to work. The young girls most certainly couldn't cut firewood, and so, in desperation, their fathers had helped them to cut some woods and arranged by the side of the road the day the prince chose to pass by and look for the girl he fell in love with. This was very confusing for the prince because he wasn't expecting to see all the young girls ready with their wood, but it was something that was easily resolved. They might be able to try to steal the show of the main person, but the prince knew how to find out who she truly was. He asked all of them to market their woods to him. Everyone advertised their woods, but the prince wasn't satisfied. He hadn't heard the voice he heard that day. Then Adim, innocently and ignorantly, came out as she usually did and began to advertise her woods. The moment the prince heard her voice and the exact same words, he knew that she was the one. There and then, in the presence of the other young maidens, the prince declared Adim his wife. The king tried to oppose it, but even he couldn't stand in the way of the prince's choice. The prince married Adim and she became the queen of the village, making her wish become a reality. Then, Adim used her new position to change everything about how she and her mother was treated for years. Don't forget to like and subscribe and drop a comment for more interesting stories.